My name is Alexis Rogers, and I'm the Customer Relationship Lead here at RightCapital. And I want to welcome you to our webinar today on modeling and presenting Medicare within RightCapital. Now, the goal of this webinar is to provide you with the resources needed to have impactful conversations with clients on Medicare, of course. As clients get older, Medicare becomes increasingly relevant, but its intricacies can often be overwhelming and complex from a client's perspective, which is why it's even more important than ever that you as their advisor have those easy to understand visuals to help a client truly understand what Medicare is, why it's important, and what it means for their physical and financial well-being. So today we're going to be highlighting how you can address this mystified topic within RightCapital in a way that will alleviate any apprehension that might be surrounding this topic for clients. So today we are going to be walking through just the best practices for streamlining your kind of notification practice within RightCapital for Medicare with clients. I'm going to walk through what that looks like and how you can get that set up. But we're also going to be walking through an actual kind of case study in terms of what we can review within each of the different tools in RightCapital in terms of Medicare coverage options and the visuals that can go a long way in helping connect the dots with a client in terms of what can be covered with Medicare. And then we're going to be looking at how you can actually model Medicare premiums and a couple other things in RightCapital and how we can view that impact in the plan as well. Towards the end, we are going to be highlighting the different resources that you do have available to you when leveraging RightCapital. One of those resources being that during this webinar, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A section to type out your questions there. More than happy to answer any questions you might have. Now, shifting gears into RightCapital. When we first log into RightCapital, we are going to be brought to what is called our advisor dashboard. Now, before we look at just the visuals that we have available to cover Medicare with and how to model it in a client plan, I first wanted to highlight one of the ways that you can kind of streamline your notification process in RightCapital in terms of getting a pre-notification prior to somebody actually being Medicare age. So one of the things that we do have available in RightCapital is what's called the RightIntel dashboard. So under the RightIntel dashboard, this is what that book of business management tool is in the system. And one of the things that you can find here is actually under opportunities. You can find, of course, a lot of key opportunities listed here, but what we're targeting today is actually under key events. So under key events, this is where we can see a lot of key life events that your clients in RightCapital are going to be incurring, whether you want to break it up by ones that are going to be occurring this year, ones that are happening this month, all time, or next year. So if we look at next year, for example, we can just see the general key events that are available for some of our clients. Today, we're going to be focusing on the Shepherd family. So we do have Derek and Meredith Shepherd, and they're going to be entering that kind of Medicare filing age very recently, having that notification go out, but also just our knowledge of next year, we are going to need to be prepared before that decision even happens. So having conversations prior to actual Medicare filing age is going to be key in ensuring that the client is fully equipped and is not going to be sensing any sort of hesitancy regarding the topic. That way you have it all addressed and ready to go prior to actually filing for Medicare itself. So all those key discussions happen before Medicare filing age, which is why there's a notification system in RightCapital that is available in terms of giving you that heads up prior to them entering that age. But this is where we can just see what's occurring for that book of business. There are other key life events that can be noticed from here too as well. Like I said, what we're focusing on is Medicare filing, which is one of those available triggers for that notification. Now, if you're leveraging RightIntel and the opportunities in these key events, and you're wanting to ensure that you're getting email notifications for this, we can set that up in the advisor dashboard by going into the bell icon in the upper right-hand corner. This is what we refer to as our notification center. In our notification center, this is where you can see all notifications that you have enabled in the notification center. But what we want to highlight is the notification settings. So under the bell icon, notification settings, this is where you can go to check off the frequency and how you want to receive notifications and for what you want to receive a notification on in RightCapital. So there's a couple different options here. There's one where you can get an immediate notification email for certain onboarding or vault activities from a client. but what we're focusing on is actually the one that's included in the daily report email. So it's a once a day email that can be sent to you as a notification, or ones that you want to include in the notification center itself. And so at the very bottom here, we can enable the opportunity for us to receive an email notification specifically for key events under the Right Intel Alert section. So if we are wanting that email to be sent out to us with that kind of list of some of those key events coming up for clients, we can enable that from here. Otherwise, we do have the option from the first column to just have it be displayed in the notification center if we don't want that email to be sent out. But this is one of those things that we can have as just one of those best practices in streamlining your notification process if you also kind of wanted a heads up from RightCapital for those key events for clients. But now that we have that baseline practice set up, we're going to be going to the client that we know is going to be entering Medicare filing age in the future, which is, like I said, that Derek and Meredith Gray Shepherd family plan. So going back into the clients list, we're going to search for that client. And we're going to open up the client plan. Now, before we walk through enabling Medicare premium calculations in the system and actually modeling that, I want to highlight the first space that we can have a very efficient conversation regarding Medicare in RightCapital, which is going to be found under the retirement module and under the aptly named Medicare module. Now, under retirement Medicare, the reason why this is going to be the starting space for our conversation today is because this is going to serve as that educational resource in terms of providing that visual backdrop and the space to kind of test out and define the different Medicare coverage options. Now, this is going to be important before we even look at modeling Medicare in the system, because if we needed to address a couple different aspects in terms of unique enrollment periods or just other Medicare considerations, this is going to be the starting point for that conversation if we haven't had it yet, which is what we're going to assume for the Gray Shepherd family. So under the Medicare module, we can start here with the Medicare tab. Now, this is where we can cover just some key Medicare filing considerations. Things like how frequently are we traveling? If we plan on, in our retirement phase, traveling often, that typically means that we run the risk of seeing multiple doctors at different locations, which might mean that we see doctors outside of our typical network for Medicare coverage. Or if we're going to be more of a homebody and we're actually going to be spending time more at home and not traveling as frequently and are knowing that we're typically going to see in-network doctors, that's going to have a different determination rather than some of the different Medicare options. So whichever one might be best suited for the client, we can select that option from here. This case, they are not going to be traveling too often in retirement. They're going to be staying mostly at home. And then we can also cover that health consideration aspect. So whether we prefer the idea of us, obviously we want to be healthy, but if we prefer the idea for lower premiums and are comfortable with lower premiums sometimes needing us to see the doctor less, that's going to be a selection from here. Or if we know that, especially if we have health considerations to keep in mind, if we're going to be seeing the doctor frequently in retirement and we have concerns about paying higher premiums, that's a determining factor for some of these different Medicare premiums as well. And then we also have a risk consideration. So whether we are preferring a more predictable cost with an out-of-pocket limit, or if we're okay with a less predictable cost with without an out-of-pocket limit. So that's going to be something we can select from here. Now you will see as we're making different selections for the Medicare considerations that the right-hand side of the screen and our proposed option is going to be indicating what our proposed option can cover. Now we can indicate in the action items what proposed Medicare choice we want to evaluate first. So we have a couple different options here, whether we want to start to evaluate original Medicare, or we can also evaluate original Medicare plus Medigap coverage, or if we wanted to evaluate Medicare Advantage with prescription drugs. So whichever one we select, we'll also see some information down below regarding what that proposed Medicare choice is covering and kind of defining it a little bit more for us. Like I said, this is really aiming at providing just additional resources and that educational resource for the client and walking through this. Whichever selection we make, we'll see that the items below or above, I should say, are going to be selected and in line with what we have indicated. So we can see here that with what I have indicated for the client's Medicare considerations is in line with proposed option original Medicare plus Medigap coverage. So we can keep that selected if that's the one we wanted to continue to evaluate. And continuing that conversation is the coverage tab. Under the coverage tab, this is going to fully define a little bit further for us what this proposed Medicare option is going to be covering in terms of hospital insurance, what is medical insurance, which is going to be Part B, Part D, and also if it's going to be covering things like dental, vision, and hearing, and also long-term care. So this is also an important one because there can be a common misconception with Medicare that it can cover a lot of the burden of long-term care costs. That's not going to be the case for most costs when it comes to long-term care. So that's something that's going to be highlighted here in case we also wanted to cover that and kind of clear that up with the client as well. Now, another important designation within this tab is the enrollment subtab. The enrollment subtab is a space that allows for us to start to define if we should be considering any sort of special enrollment periods for the clients. Because with certain programs within Medicare, we might have certain categorizations with our employer. If we have group coverage under 20 employees or above, that might allow for us to have special enrollment periods for certain aspects of Medicare filing. So this is where we can also host that conversation, and just starting with that idea of if at age 65, we're going to be receiving Social Security, we'd make that selection from here. Or if we are actually not going to be receiving Social Security at that time, which is going to be the case for the client. So we're going to change that for both of them. Because often when we file for Social Security prior to age 65, which is the Medicare filing age, we are typically going to be automatically enrolled in Social Security, and obviously with Medicare Part A and a couple other ones. So it's going to be important designation from there. And then there's also going to be a drop down covering group plan coverage at age 65. So we'd indicate if somebody's going to have group coverage for themselves and their spouse, and the plan covers more than or less than 20 employees, or if they have a retiree health plan or COBRA, or if they do not have group plan coverage at all. So we select the second option for Meredith, and then the second one for Derek as well. We'll see in the action items the specific enrollment period that is going to be relevant for the client and co-client. So what we indicate above is going to directly impact what we see below in regards to the unique enrollment period if relevant. Now, if somebody's just going to be following the stereotypical path, we'll see when we make that selection for no group plan coverage that it's just going to be that stereotypical, very standard enrollment period process for the clients in terms of that enrollment period Medicare filing. And like I said, this is just a resource to host that conversation in regards to maybe highlighting that there can be different enrollment periods. And you will also find down below additional resources for the client in regards to the Social Security Administration website or the Medicare website, which is a fantastic resource when also looking for additional guidance or coverage comparison options directly from the source itself, the Medicare website. Now, one other tip that I want to highlight within this module before we look at modeling the client plan and Medicare in general is that within each of the modules of RightCapital, you'll also be able to leverage notes. So we can actually see here that I already left a note indicating that I'm giving my calendar link for the client to click into to book some time with me when they're ready to have a further discussion about Medicare filing. But if we click on the notes button here, that's going to open up a drawer that allows for us to add an additional note within this section or customize the existing note. Now we can kind of see one of the examples of how we might leverage a note. And the first kind of note that we add is the note that is marked as shared with client. When you have the note marked as shared with client, what this means is that if the client has access to this module and they have access to RightCapital, they'd be able to view this note. It would also be included in PDF reports as well. And this can be used as something that is that open line of communication with the client. So this might be what we use to either state our intention behind why this module is important for the client to be looking at, or maybe it's us stating additional resources to demystify Medicare, kind of like what I'm doing here, or it can be just that kind of personal touch in regards to maybe us just acknowledging, hey, don't forget that we plan on filing for Social Security at age 65. So you want to make sure you're indicating that there. Maybe the client has access before your client meeting and is playing around. Anything like that, it can be used for that multitude of purposes up to your discretion, of course. Now, the second kind of note is a note that is marked as not shared with client. If we have it marked as not shared with client, this means that the client would not be able to view this if they have access to this module. It's not going to be included in PDF reports, and this is probably going to be that more internally facing note. So this might be a note that you're leaving for yourself about maybe what was discussed here. Maybe it's just a note that you want to come back to. That way you have a reference of maybe what you were working on in this module before you had to run for a client meeting or for any sort of purpose. Or maybe we just don't want to highlight this note with the client yet, which is going to be the case. So we're going to just keep that selected with shared with client and hit save. Now, since I also have it marked as shared with client, that means that the note is also going to be visible at the high level when we're navigating throughout the system, as you can see here. But now that we walk through some of the aspects in the Medicare module, with the final tab just being some tips in regards to Medicare filing, including that important aspect for HSA contributions not being eligible once we're enrolled in Medicare, some of those other tips as well. Once we highlight this educational resource that we have available, that's typically when we'd want to pivot just to our client case study and just learn some more about what is going on with their plan. So we are going to go into the profile section and into blueprint. And I just want to define a little bit further the family that we're looking at. So going to profile blueprint, this is where we can just see what is happening with the client's current plan and a nice, easy to understand visualization, starting with the client's net worth. So the clients, they're going to be right before on the cusp of Medicare filing age. They're age 64. They have 3 children. And we also have a total net worth right now of 2.5 million, including some assets and of course some liabilities. For our goals, we do plan on taking a family vacation this year. And then we also are going to be retiring at age 67 and 70, respectively, for co-client and client. And then we also have some long-term care goals kicking on at the end of life as well. Now, under income, savings, and expenses, we also, of course, have some decent income coming in. We also have some decent saving habits to note as well. And of course, some decent spending habits to note. Now, to ensure that we are accurately capturing Medicare premiums, if we wanted to turn those on, one of the goals that we'd be using to model that is going to be found either under Blueprint Goals or under the actual profile goals. So I'm actually just going to navigate to profile goals, but you can also achieve that in the Blueprint section if needed as well. But under profile goals, the card that we want to ensure is leveraging the aspect of Medicare calculations is the annual retirement healthcare cost card. So with the annual retirement healthcare cost card, when we click into this, this is the card that we use to capture retirement healthcare costs in RightCapital for this client plan. So the thing that's important here, there's going to be 2 different things that we specify within this card. The first thing that we'd want to note is that we can control when this cost starts. Now I have my default set to start at their retirement age respectively for client and co-client, but for those instances in which we know somebody might be having a more unique path in Medicare filing or when their healthcare costs in retirement are starting, that might be when we change this to a different age, a calendar year, or starting at different time periods. Now, the second thing we specify within this card is what cost estimate we want to utilize. I already have detailed estimate selected, but we also have the option for customized dollar amount. So if we just wanted to enter a flat dollar amount for the year, that's also an option. And we also can use a national average if we just wanted to pull what the national average are for healthcare costs for somebody that retires age 65 essentially today. But for today's conversation, we're going to be highlighting detailed estimate as the approach that we're using to capture Medicare premiums for this family. With the detailed estimate dropdown selected, this will populate 4 different fields for us that we can start to use to carve the path that we're taking for Medicare filing. Starting with pre-Medicare costs, which are going to be only relevant if we have this cost starting prior to age 65. Now, in this case, my clients are not going to be taking this prior to age 65, so it's not going to be relevant for them. But if that were the case, and this was starting prior to age 65, we'd see pre-Medicare costs kick in then. Then once they would turn 65, we would see Medicare premiums Part B and Part D be automatically calculated based off of AGI, considering the 2-year look back that is relevant, and the out-of-pocket costs. So in this case, since mine is going to be starting post that kind of filing age or at that filing age if desired, we'd say Medicare Part B automatically calculated based off of AGI. We also have the selection for Medicare Part D to indicate that somebody's actually not enrolled in Medicare Part D, or if they have the unique instance where they're not paying for Medicare Part D, which is very unique and typically for state military employees. So not very common, but if that is the case, we can turn off Medicare Part D calculations if needed. It's not the case for this family though, so we're going to keep that selected. And then we also have an out-of-pocket cost field as well. So with the out-of-pocket costs, this is going to be a space that is going to be a cost post age 65 on top of the Medicare premiums. This typically represents either Medigap coverage if somebody's paying for that, additional dental or vision coverage if needed, or whatever kind of additional coverage we're looking at outside of Medicare premiums that we're capturing already. So let's say for this family, that's going to be flat $2,000 per client and co-client. We can specify that from here and hit save. Now for the retirement ages, I'm actually going to set these both to be 65 to be a little bit more closely in line with what we actually want them to be doing, which is them looking at essentially retiring and then entering the Medicare program immediately. Now, once we have entered that particular cost, there's a couple different spaces that we can use to either highlight the Medicare premiums themselves or just see the different kinds of costs associated with Medicare premiums in general. Now, one of the first spaces that we're going to go to access this information is going to be under the retirement module. And we're going to be navigating to the cash flows specifically. So under retirement cash flows, this is where we can see a breakdown of the year by year cash flows of the client's inflows and outflows via the summary tab, starting with the expenses. So under expenses, this is where we can see their healthcare costs by clicking on the healthcare cost column. Now we can see additional insights by drilling down into each of these column headers. So if we wanted to see the breakdown for Meritus healthcare premiums, for example, we can see those Medicare Part B, Part D, and additional costs and what that looks like across their lifetime. Like I said, we are going to be considering the 2-year look back that's applicable for this calculation. And we do consider IRMA, income-related monthly adjustment amounts, that's relevant for when we are going over certain Medicare brackets. So this is how we can see it at the high level in terms of what is happening for the Medicare premiums in those detailed approaches. One of the other visuals that we can use in terms of targeting and just analyzing where we're falling for the Medicare premium brackets is going to be found under the tax module. So under the tax module, we can access our tax strategies tab, which is where we can format a lot of different tax efficient planning strategies. And when we talk about tax efficient planning strategies, that's typically when we'd also have another kind of third question there, which is how does that kind of tax planning impact my Medicare premiums if we have that considered here. So one of the different visuals we have under tax strategies is the calibration tab. The default is going to be the ordinary income tax bracket located here, but we do have from this dropdown a couple other visuals available as well. If we wanted to highlight key tax components, we can, or capital gains tax brackets. But what we want to focus on is the Medicare premium tax brackets. So this is where we can see across their lifetime where they're kind of falling into each of the brackets, but also just defining a little bit for us what the different income related monthly adjustment amounts are for the different brackets as well. Now, with that in mind, if we are using this particular module for one of the very popular tools that it has, the Roth conversion tool, and the fill up the tax brackets via the Roth conversion tool, oftentimes, this can also be used to just see the impacts to Medicare premiums. If we're using the default for ordinary income tax brackets, that is something that we can kind of see by going down into details. We can be greeted with the withdrawals and conversions. It'll tell us how much we're converting and when with that strategy we had selected. But we can also see the breakdown of Medicare premiums as well. So if we're leveraging this particular tool to see tax efficient planning strategies and how it impacts the plan, we can also view some additional details from here. Now, with that in mind, though, there is another way we can leverage the Roth conversion strategy tool, which is that intelligent tool, which is to actually toggle the conversion target down to Medicare premium tax bracket. With this allows for us to see if we can do Roth conversions without triggering IRMA or income-related monthly adjustment amounts. So I can make that selection from there, use the slider, and we'll see how much more we'll have in tax-adjusted ending wealth if we are considering the idea of us not wanting to proceed or go over any and incur any IRMA through Roth conversions. So you can see what that looks like. We can also see under details the impacts to Medicare premiums, but also under withdrawals and conversions, how much we have that we can convert and when, with that idea in mind. So it's one of the other ways we can leverage this tax strategies tool to target the Medicare premium tax brackets. But if you're leveraging in other ways with the ordinary income tax bracket, you can still see some vital pieces of information in terms of the implications to Medicare premiums and IRMA. Now, for those of us that have clients that are already going to be filing for Medicare and you're looking at capturing Medicare premium calculations, or for this client, we have them almost filing for Medicare next year. I mean, that is when they're going to be filing. And we consider that there is a 2-year look back. It's important that you have a space to designate previous year's MAGI if you're looking to have a precise calculation for Medicare premiums in the system. So to access and specify this information, we would go into the gear icon in the upper right-hand corner and go into settings. And this is going to be found under tax assumptions. So under tax assumptions, at the very bottom, there's a space for you to be able to specify prior year's MAGI. MAGI is what's used to calculate that 2-year look back for Medicare premiums. This is going to be relevant for those clients that are either on the precipice of filing, like the Gray Shepherd family that we have here, or if we have a client that we have Medicare premiums turned on for, and they're already filing for Medicare in the system. So if that's the case, we want to specify the MAGI from last year and the MAGI from 2 years ago if we wanted to capture that as well. This can also be used for student loan calculations, so it serves a couple different purposes. Student loans are not going to be relevant for this family. Luckily, they're not paying for those still, but that's going to be relevant for Medicare filing strategies to capture the baseline information accurately. So that's going to be an important denotation within the system that you have available in terms of just being more precise in that calculation. Now, one of the things that I wanted to highlight, because we are going to be covering a couple presentation tactics for this before we dive into resources and Q&A. When we're looking to curate a PDF report of this information, we go to the gear icon report section. Under here, what we covered today was going to be the retirement Medicare module. That's going to be that educational resource. We also have the opportunity to include cash flows in that report as well. Now you'll notice that cash flows and a couple others are underlined. That's going to be an indicator to us that we can click into it for more functionality. For the report curation, that allows for us to be further refined in terms of what we're including. So if we wanted to be very precise, we can just include a summary and leave mostly everything else out of it, just if we're looking at highlighting that kind of expense. We can even get more granular if desired. And we can also highlight the tax strategies if we wanted to. We can check that off and click into tax strategies once again. And that's where we found that Medicare premium tax bracket visual. And if we wanted to highlight that, we can also just be very selective from here. Or if we wanted to highlight everything that we found in that module, we can keep it as is. So a lot of great information found there from the tax planning perspective. Profile Blueprint was also one that we covered. But I wanted to highlight just a tip for when we're curating PDF reports. You also have the opportunity to reorder the flow of that presentation by dragging and dropping the different sub-tabs. So if we wanted to highlight Profile Blueprint first, we can drag and drop that aspect. If we wanted to highlight Medicare even sooner and then cash flows, we can also reorder those as needed. Same thing with the sub-tabs here. If we wanted to just reorder these and maybe cover calibration first and then details, we can certainly break that up as needed. And if we have a preferred layout that we liked and we established just now, you also have the opportunity to save that as a new template to use going forward. When you click on the Save New Template button, that allows for us to title this template. Maybe this is our Medicare filing report. We can then save it, and then going forward, we will have the opportunity to toggle that and select the template and pre-fill everything and reorder everything for us based off of that particular indication. So it's one of the ways that we can present that particular methodology of the Medicare filing report. One of the other presentation tactics that I wanted to highlight today is also what's referred to as our client presentation mode. So if we go back into the advisor portal, we can select the client from the client list. Now it's going to be pre-selected for us because I was just in the client plan. But if we haven't selected them already, just make sure they're highlighted here. In order to access the client presentation mode, we'd want to go to the Planning Access tab. And from the downward arrow, we will see the opportunity to click on the Open in Client Access Mode button. This is also what we refer to as our client presentation mode as well. Now, where this is a unique way of presenting in RightCapital, this is of course relevant for live presentations, is that that particular mode is only going to be highlighting which modules we have indicated in the Planning Access Selection tab. So we can just check off those ones we only wanted to highlight for today's conversation in regards to Medicare filing. So in this case, we want to look at the Medicare module. Maybe we still wanted to highlight the cash flows. We can also keep that. But we also can click into the header once again to see a further breakdown. So maybe some of these are not going to be relevant to the topic. So we're going to keep that deselected. And then we're going to be highlighting tax strategies and then profile blueprint. That's another conversation we'll have later on. We'll hit save. And then we click on the downward arrow here. We can then open in client access mode, also referred to as our client presentation mode. And this is going to be an entirely different look and feel to that kind of presentation tactic. And now we're starting directly with the Medicare module. And then we can dive into each of these different pieces of the Medicare module and aiming at demystifying it with the different drop downs. You still can make selections and changes within this mode. So you still have full control and full access as an advisor. This is just simply a more intentional and a more focused conversation piece. Same thing when we go to the cash flows. You can toggle to that particular tool. You still can toggle between the different plans that you have indicated, use the different visuals and toggle between them. And of course, with the maps, this is going to be highlighting a specific year of the cash flows and that easy to understand visualization of it. So if we wanted to toggle to a different year, that's an important piece within the tool. You still can do so within the different sliders. So it's also available as well. Same thing with summary. You still can drill down into each of the column headers as needed. You see that breakdown of Medicare premiums in the future. And then we can navigate to the tax piece where we talk about tax strategies and highlighting the calibration tab and the Medicare premium tax brackets and some of the pieces found there. And then we highlight profile blueprint as we kind of discussed earlier today. So that's going to be some of the different presentation tactics available when looking at highlighting Medicare with that more precise way in RightCapital.